new campaign and initiative that we're carrying out through the end of the year. So if you have computers or devices and you want to go to encryptallthethings.net, you'll see that we are launching what we're calling the Encrypt All the Things campaign. The centerpiece of this campaign is going to be the Data Security Action Plan, which are 7 steps we're asking that all companies take to protect individual data in order to move from kind of a collect all the things mentality to a protect all the things mentality. So we're hoping that we are able to push this forward. We have a ton of awesome supporters just already, including Google and Twitter, DuckDuckGo, and civil society groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the Open Technology Institute. They've all put themselves out as supporters from this already. You can sign on your own name if you're interested in taking action, and we'll provide you information on events and other things that are taking place along with the campaign. And so, yes, so thank you for joining us, and thank you for helping us launch this really great thing that we get to do, and we get to move things forward. In the wake of a lot of revelations about spying and surveillance, we've talked a lot about transparency over the last few months and figuring out when governments are requesting data. And now we're trying to move beyond that into preventing unauthorized collection of data, preventing people from going in and taking information without asking, because we're finding out that that's happening a lot. So we have awesome stickers if you want them and you want to show your support of the campaign. And now we're going to talk about crypto a little bit on this panel. Our moderator, Declan McCullough of CBS and CNET, go on sabbatical through the end of the year.
More like the end of the month.
Through the end of the month. We'll lead the panel, and thank you.
But thanks, Amy. Amy is too modest to say that she is a senior policy counsel at Access, which might have had something to do with organizing this conference today, and before was at the Electronic Privacy Information Center in Washington, D.C., where I remember interviewing her on topics like drones and cybersecurity legislation and NSA surveillance, in fact. And we have Pranesh, who is a policy director with the Center for the Internet and Society in New Delhi. Chris is an internet policy engineer at Mozilla in Washington, D.C. Internet policy engineer means that you engineer policy? Or
interpret as you will.
Also, he's too modest to say that he actually has a graduate degree in computer science and a separate one in law, so he might actually, unlike most of us, know what he's talking about. And we have Eleanor directly to my left, who's a resident self-described geek, because there has to be one on every panel. It's a requirement here. And a principal security engineer at the Open Internet Tools Project. And I am at CNET, and also working during sabbatical on a news recommendation startup called recent.io. You can take a look if you like and sign up for the beta. Okay, so up until about 9 months ago, when we first heard of some guy named Edward Snowden, I think it's fair to say that we thought we won the crypto wars. I mean, I remember living through these crypto wars of the 1990s. I was on the cyberpunks list 20 years ago. This was the ground zero of the crypto wars. Some of you remember this. It was combining academics and activists and programmers. I hosted DC cyberpunks meetings at Adams Morgan. I remember visiting one on the Alpine Inn on Alpine Road in Portola Valley out here. And we were focused on topics like convincing courts that encryption was free speech, which should not be regulated, and we thought we won on that. We were focused on things like eliminating crypto export controls. You can actually post it on the internet. And we thought we won on that one, and we were focused on opposing the Clipper chip and government-mandated encryption. And we thought we won on that. That was Bill Clinton's first tech initiative. We were focused on opposing domestic controls and encryption, including a ban on software like secure web browsers and PGP. And even though a House of Representatives committee approved this, would have banned this stuff outright, we thought we won that one as well. But we were wrong. I mean, we know in December there was the Reuters report about RSA and a deal reportedly struck involving weakening a random number generator. RSA responded to this as recently as last week. A very narrow denial. It was not as broad or as comprehensive as you might want. And you had President Obama's NSA review group late last year saying the federal government should not weaken commercial encryption software. It didn't say must not. It didn't say this is off the table completely. Well, like maybe they shouldn't do it. It's not that good of an idea. And we had a serious SSL go-to fail bug that Apple fixed last week. But it was the interesting thing. It was caught by two different static code analysis tools. I talked to one of the vendors. The other one has a long blog post. You can read it. Apple didn't catch that, but I'd be surprised if the NSA did not. We're focused on whether or not the NSA or any government agency should mandate weakening encryption standards or government backdoors. What are the policy implications of this, and what are also the international policy implications of this? Is anyone willing to defend the proposition that, at least in some cases, we've got a terrorist threat, there's going to be a nuclear bomb that blows up Manhattan or New Delhi? In any cases, should the government do this? Can I have one dissenting vote, or all of you are kind of like, yes? Okay, so you're the NSA shill on the panel.
Yes.
Fantastic.
They chose the foreigner to do that.
So what's the answer? Sometimes?
The answer is not weakening encryption, because that actually harms everyone. Okay, that's too blunt to it. But and so when and most of what the NSA is into and that most of us are most concerned about is pervasive surveillance, and that is not something that I am unfortunately willing to defend. But I am willing to defend the proposition that targeted surveillance may sometimes be necessary, and some of what the NSA does fall within that category. And some of what the Indian government does falls within that category. And that is something we should actually be looking to protect, while saying that there are multiple attack vectors when there are targeted access operations, etc. And some of these are cause more harm than they're worth. So creating a backdoor, for instance, is creating much more harm than it's worth, even if you're only going to attack some people using that backdoor. Okay, that's just not worth the risk, because anyone can access that backdoor. On the other hand, there are means, for instance, of saying if if you can work with, for instance, a company like Apple, and use Apple to deliver malware to a target's computer, okay? And if it's being used for law enforcement purposes, and you have already gone through the right procedures in terms of getting a court, getting a judge to rule on this, then the question is open, and I'm not going to forcefully defend it right now, but I'm saying that I'm not willing to condemn it. I think in that kind of a situation, it might actually be defensible.
So let me try to summarize your position, perhaps inartfully, as with certain controls. Chris, you're a lawyer. Are you practicing? Are you barred? Are you paying actual fees to the
I
bar?
proudly went inactive in the California bar about a month ago.
Oh, well, it's not very much. I'll let you answer the question anyway. Are you okay with oversight, court orders, and weakening, say, encryption standards just for the real bad guys?
I think at the level of broadness and categoricalness that we've been discussing it, I'd have to say no. I want to subdivide this into a couple of different things. The idea of targeted surveillance is something I would certainly not condemn either. I think it's very important for some purposes, but how it's done is very important. And I mean that both from the perspective of rule of law and due process, but also from the engineering perspective. So getting back into the core of this crypto wars context, the problem that I have with two of the categories of things that have been talked about, pressures to put backdoors into communications and security tools, and efforts at NIST to undermine security standards, is that these two things for me both squarely fall into the category of far worse than they're worth, and Pranesh is not implying otherwise. But these are two big things that are going on here, and these are really concerning to me. So Mozilla has been really working a lot, trying to do as much as we can to raise this, to talk about how harmful this is for global trust. When the president came out with his speech on reform, we have a decent conversation going now about mass surveillance. We haven't gotten acceptable reform yet, but at least we have a good conversation going. We don't even have a good conversation going yet about backdoors, about zero-day vulnerabilities being stockpiled, about weakenings of encryption standards, and this to me is a big problem and something that I definitely am categorically opposed to. So, I can.
Well, we'll come back to this. So maybe we can differentiate this or split this into two halves. Maybe it's okay to insert backdoors into individual companies' products, but not okay to insert backdoors into, say, NIST algorithms. You're a self-described geek. What do you think? You're going to be you're going to be testing these.
So I don't think that it's reasonable to insert backdoors in specific products. I think that
Court authorization?
Nope.
Trust the judiciary?
Chinese hackers breaking into the Kalia systems at Google, right? They specifically targeted the backdoors that were put in there for surveillance with court order, with all of this other stuff. A backdoor is a vulnerability. They are the same thing. And there is no way of telling who is going to use that vulnerability. Now, and that's any time you are specifically inserting code, or if you are using systems that are intended for legitimate code delivery to deliver backdoors. You know, anytime you're in a position where you can deliver a backdoor targeted to a specific user, that entire system is a bug. You know, and this is why we need, we need coercion-resistant engineering inside corporations. We need coercion-resistant backdoor or coercion-resistant update delivery systems that make it impossible for a vendor to target a specific user. If NSA wants to get backdoors, they can do them the same way everybody else does. They can, review products, they can find the code, they can spend the time and the money to actually find those bugs themselves. And they can't do that within an organization where ComSec, where the NSA's protective function exists within the same walls as the attack function, because then you end up in a situation where the protective function is useless. Which is a serious function of NSA. One of NSA's real roles within USG is to be the absolute technical backstop on the protection of domestic digital infrastructure, except that we can't trust them to do that because they're also attacking us. So ComSec has to get completely separated out into a different agency, not under ODNI, not under DoD, I don't know, put it under Department of Energy or something, just somewhere completely different that has some technical means, right? Or put it under the FCC.
Well, okay, so we have.
But it'd be better than inside anywhere else.
But isn't this a little like, well, let's have this great idea. We'll split this up and carve this out and bring out the knife and chop this portion off, but it's kind of like the mice talking about how we're going to bell the cat. I think we have one person on this panel from DC, in DC. Amy, are you still?
I'm still
you're
in
still,
DC.
Okay, you actually live in DC. Poor thing. I spent 10 years. The West
I
Coast
think
is
I
much
actually
nicer.
live out the street from where you were holding your crypto.
That's probably right. Well, I was on Calvert Street and I was from
I'm on Calvert Street.
Oh, nice. Okay. So we have these ideas to bell the NSA cat. Are these actually likely? Are we going to have any reasonable reform proposals passed in the next few years? And B, if they're passed, will the NSA actually listen to them?
Do I think anything is going to pass in the next couple of years?
Reasonable reform proposals is the question, Counselor.
I think that there will be reasonable reform proposals made. I think that they're important, and I think they should be passed. I think one of them is actually the law that absolutely requires NIST, the standard setting body, to consult with NSA on standards before they go out the door. And this is not a transparent process. There's no way to know what they're consulting or what's going on. And this is what we found out. The NSA had artificially lowered one of the standards that had gone out the door. To this day, as far as I know, they haven't said if this has happened with any other standards. They've confirmed that it happened with the one that we know about, but they haven't said this hasn't happened any other time. They haven't said to what degree they confer when things go out the door. And they haven't said that they're going to fix it. So it's a huge issue. And now we're talking about this one standard, and that's what they're focusing on. And it's like, okay, we're going to put this out for comment. You can now comment on the standard that was compromised by the NSA that we know about. But you can't comment on any of the other standards that are out there. They won't tell you what other ones might have vulnerabilities built in. So that law needs to be changed and totally overhauled. The NSA structure needs to be overhauled. You can't have, like Ella said, an offensive and a defensive function in the same agency, because one will always eat the other. And I don't think that is any less true for the NSA. It's actually incredibly true. And I think these are things that people are looking at in DC. These are conversations that are being had. And there are lawmakers that are very much on this side, that understand the issues and are pushing. And I think they're in the minority, and I don't think that anybody in Congress right now gets along. I think that's a problem. So it's going to take some coalition building on the Hill to push this forward, and I think we need to have people like the people on this panel saying all of us are not safe. We are all less secure because this is happening, and members of Congress are less secure, members of the Supreme Court are less secure. It's always more personal when you can hit it home and they can feel it themselves and they know that it's their communications that are being looked at. And if we can hit that message in, then I think there's a shot.
Is it, I mean, it seems like from far too long writing about this sad state of computer security. I spent last Friday looking at Wireshark hex dumps and verified that yes, Yahoo and AIM to some extent and ICQ are still leaking the information about the text or metadata of communications. I mean, is this just, is the infrastructure so sad that we should just kind of give up on reining in the NSA and hope that they can stay ahead of the Chinese, Russian, et cetera, intelligence agencies? This is a silly question.
I can reframe it a little bit if you'd like. So I've been thinking about sort of the bigger surveillance pictures requiring 3 completely separate degrees of reform, or angles or vectors, if you will. One is law. We need legal reform. We need legal process reform. I think that's particularly applicable to NIST standards being watered down, to backdoors being trying to be injected in, and to the category of things that we can't build for. But I think there is a category of things that we can build for, and I think I think technology and civil society groups are working together and are starting conversations about how we can do a better job of that. I mean, we've seen a lot more SSL go up on servers in the past 9 months. We've seen a lot more TLS with perfect forward secrecy go on servers in the past 9 months. And these are some of the things that we can do without having to wait for Congress to pass a bill or for the administration to change something. I personally think, encrypt all the things, yes. It's exactly what that initiative is about. I think there's a third angle as well, which I don't think gets talked about often enough, and this is a bit of a wild card, so we can drop it if it's not of interest. But I think there's a major cultural shift that needs to happen as well within the NSA, and this aligns a bit with what Ella was saying about a functional separation. I think that is something definitely worth considering and talking about, though they've already rejected separating out Cyber Command, the cyber war arm, from the surveillance. So I don't know how much he'll do with that. But I feel like even when we get to the point where finally we pass legal reform, even when we get to the point where we have more perfect forward secrecy on more data connections, even when we get to the point where we have somewhat useful PGP on our emails for a critical mass of people, if we still have an agency whose culture is we are going to do everything in our power to get all of the data that we need, those reforms are just going to be watered down, and we're going to be facing crypto wars 3 in another 20 years.
So you're disagreeing, I think.
Yeah, because I think this change of culture won't ever come. Not from the NSA, not from any intelligence agency. Sure, we can, through laws and other means, rein in law enforcement agencies. They're far easier to control. But intelligence agencies will always either work at the right at the edge of the law or beyond it.
I'm an optimist.
Yes, and Chris is an optimist, and I'm not. I think that that there can, as Chris pointed out, be done lots of things to prevent pervasive surveillance, which are at the technological level. If an agency is really determined and has the technical chops for it, it's difficult to prevent targeted surveillance. Yes, it's
impossible.
Yeah, close to impossible, especially when you don't control every single thing about the device you own. When, for instance, you order it from Amazon and they can reroute it through the NSA centers and send you something else with a bug in it. And when there are governments like India, which through contract, not through law, but through a contract with telecom services, requires that they not employ any bulk encryption beyond 40 bits on their networks. And this is despite GSM, due to the efforts of the Brits and the French in the early 90s, actually being a watered down thing insofar as encryption goes anyhow. And so the crypto wars in the US where I think we're won, but we do have other examples like GSM. We do have a reversal now in terms of people who want who want to be able to sell software and not have restrictions on or export controls. Which
Let me interrupt you and ask you this. I followed the NSA and Edward Snowden revelations reasonably closely in advance the story in some small ways, but I haven't followed what India is doing. I mean, do you have, are your intelligence agencies, which sadly don't have the funding of ours, I'm sure, are they trying the same sorts of things that involve fiber taps, subverting encryption standards, intercepting computers before they are delivered to install malware?
The intercepting of computers before they're delivered, I think is quite ingenious, and I don't think the Indian government's there yet. But in terms of getting to the fiber at submarine cable levels, in 2010, Outlook magazine, an excellent reporter called Psychotapta, did a fantastic report that showed how the NTRO, the National Technical Research Organization, which is the equivalent of the NSA in India, was actually getting stuff right at the landing cables in Bombay. He even pinpointed the location of the center in Malad within Bombay where that was happening. And that didn't lead to a big hue and cry. Sure, there was some stuff. And every time a politician gets wrongfully wiretapped, and this happens through different ways. Sometimes the government authorizes it, sometimes someone else who shouldn't have the authority authorizes it and gets it, etc. But every time that happens, there's a minor scandal, but no actual reform, no church commission, etc. that has ever happened in India. And you have idiotic things such as this 40-bit rule actually in contracts. And recently, the contract in which that exists, the Universal Access Service license, was undergoing reform, and there were calls from the telecom regulator for comments, except that the bit which deals with encryption was never open to comment. And they didn't have a relook at that because the intelligence agencies just have too strong a hold over that.
But this is this goes back to my let's give up or how to build a cat problem, which might be saying the same thing two different ways. Amy, let's have you be the voice of Washington D.C. Officialdom if we can. Has there been talk of a church commission? I have some of the original reports, and they're kind of musty now, but the actual physical copies, and it's remarkable. It was thorough. It really documented government overreach in a way I have not seen since. Is something like this in the cards?
There has been a lot of talk and there's a lot of push. The proposals for a new church committee got watered down a little bit in the wake of the President's Review Group coming forward and being appointed to look into some of these programs. And they actually issued a report that was much more thorough than I think anybody in DC expected it to be, especially since all 5 members had some connection to the administration. But it came out and it was very strong. It recommended an end to the bulk collection program, and it recommended an end to interference with crypto standards, and it actually said some things that we didn't expect it to say. So that was a small step toward a church committee, but not a church committee. We also have the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which has some oversight capabilities, also not a church committee. The other review group tried to give them more authority or recommended that they get more authority. So they could operate maybe in the future as kind of an ongoing watered down church committee, but they're pushing. I don't see this as something that Congress is ready to put into place yet,
Especially
but civil
since
society is excited about it.
The oversight committees are the ones that are the NSA's biggest defenders. I mean, back in a generation or two ago, you didn't have this dynamic, and so maybe that's causing some of the resistance.
It is, and the problem is you really have to look at an oversight body. Because a lot of oversight bodies, for example, privacy offices and agencies, the NSA just hired their very first chief privacy officer. But you hear just months ago that the Department of Homeland Security's former chief privacy officer is called a terrorist inside her own agency because she tried to put in place privacy protections. And when you look from the outside about the privacy protections she tried to put in, they didn't go very far. So she was just, I mean...
An ineffective terrorist.
Sure,
yeah. Let me bring you in. We have a situation where you have multi-billion-dollar companies, Yahoo, AOL, ICQ, which is owned by Mail.ru, is so very popular in Russia, who knew, that have they're not even encrypting IM conversations, which is, this is 15-year-old technology. Nor is all email sent between mail servers encrypted. Why are the companies actually not doing this? It's been 9 months since Edward Snowden. Google is, Facebook is, to a decent extent. Microsoft is to a decent extent. But first, why are the companies not doing this? And second, what kind of pressure can customers from elsewhere apply?
I'll answer that, although I do want to jump back to a little bit on the policy side after that. Partially it's expensive. They don't want to take any of the engineering cost on board. It's not that expensive.
Google said in a public blog post it was a 5% fee or something like that. How was that in line?
Yeah, well, ask Yahoo what their margins look like these days. They can't necessarily afford that right now. Or they certainly don't want to unless they think they have to. Unless you have a culture within a company that believes in user privacy and in the engineering of user privacy, you're not going to get this change. So I agree with you that we do need a big culture change, but I don't think we need a culture change in the NSA, or rather we're not going to get one. What we need a culture change in Silicon Valley and in developer communities and on the business side. And this is one of the things one of the big reasons why a lot of these companies aren't making big shifts. And for all that the encrypt all the things signatories, it's great that Google has signed on to encrypt all the things, but that doesn't mean that they're going to build a system where they don't get to see what people post on Google+, right? There's still absolutely no way that they are going to encrypt content away from themselves because that's their business model. Their business model is reading your email.
You're absolutely right, the business model is ad-based unless you're, say, at Google Apps for Business customer, pay $50 a year per user, and you don't get ads. That is no reason to not encrypt it. Then
absolutely, except that they have to redo all of their infrastructure, because all of their infrastructure, the reason why they sell Google Apps for Business for $50 instead of for $500 is because they've got all the infrastructure they built for Gmail, and it's just slap a different name on it and push it.
So you have to raise the cost, and we're in good shape.
Well, you need a different business model, right? And you need to fundamentally change the business model that you're operating under. And until we see fundamental changes in business model in Silicon Valley, so that we don't have an industry which operates in collusion with surveillance, not necessarily in collusion with government surveillance intentionally, but with corporate surveillance for the purposes of advertising, as long as those companies are structured with the intent to bring this information together at a single point, there's only so far they can walk down a security road.
I think that some of us might see a difference between what you call surveillance for corporate purposes, which might be recording data about user habits so you can improve your product, versus the NSA or the FBI or DEA want to surveil you to put you in prison. But
it's difference of intent, but it's not difference of architecture.
You might want to retain data for just a few months versus forever. I can see some differences. But Chris, how has Mozilla changed its plans? I know you were in DC, now you're out here. I'm glad you made that transition, maybe as well. But what has Mozilla done differently, if anything, in the last 6 months since we first saw the Edward Snowden revelations?
So I think that it has definitely caused us to up the amount of internal time and thought and resources that we've put into this. There's a lot of stuff that I'm not sure, I'm not fully plugged into the engineering side, so although I know of a few concrete things, I'm not sure how sensitive they are yet, so I don't want to go into too much detail. But
tell me a little bit of detail.
I can give you, I think, a little bit of detail. I mean, we don't yet have a whole lot of user data, so we're also not in the same category as a lot of the companies that I think are more key for this conversation. But we do have a web browser, we do have a new mobile phone, and we have 500 million users around the world of these two products. And we come at this from a very different place. I mean, our business model is, I work for a for-profit company that's 100% owned by a not-for-profit company, so it's a very different kind of world. But that, I think, frees us to break some new ground on how to engineer privacy and security features into the product from the get-go. We announced at Mobile World Congress just a week ago a partnership with Deutsche Telekom to have a more privacy-controlled phone I don't know any more details than that. I honestly haven't had time to dig under the hood, but we're pushing at the phone layer and how that can be architected and engineered in ways that can help a little bit. We're pushing at the web browser layer. We're also pushing with things like WebRTC and trying to see how far we can get that. I think there's a lot of good security features in how that's done. And if we can get these things embedded within the web browser, that maybe one less attack surface, or maybe just one more complicated attack surface for vulnerabilities going forward. I mean, I do think that there's more to be done, but I think we're at the beginning of that conversation. And I think until about a year ago, there was some focus on it, and now there's a whole lot more.
Pranash, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and to talk a little bit about the fantastic things that Mozilla and others are doing. Well, for instance, in Firefox 28, in the latest version, they've included TLS 1.2, and that might not mean a lot to most of us, but that makes a big difference. And in the default settings for different kinds of chat servers, for instance, that you can XMPP servers that you can download, encryption is now turned on by default, whereas a year ago it wasn't. Okay, so the Snowden revelations in the technology world is actually shifting lots of things to encryption by default out of the box, rather than something you have to hunt down and look up the different settings online and make the changes on your own servers. Now, it's going to take a long while to actually change this. IETF, where discussions are going on about this, amongst other places, well, their email servers don't support TLS. Okay, and that's something that, and this was reported 6 months ago, and it's still in the process of changing, though it doesn't take too much time. And it's something that's going to take a while for older software to shift over, but I think we're actually slowly getting there. Google, for instance, they operate Google Talk, and Google Talk's stuff isn't encrypted by default.
Is or is not?
Is not.
So you're saying that they use an insecure connection from your computer to the server?
No, they use an insecure connection. They don't support encryption on the other end of any server-to-server communication.
So it's not end-to-end?
No, it's not even server-to-server. So they don't support. So if I'm running an XMPP server that wants to chat with someone else running, using gmail.com, I can't use encryption with them right now. So the middle part is unencrypted right now. And hopefully that's something that'll change before May 2014, because there's a worldwide movement to say that XMPP and Jabber chat services should be encrypted by then. But it's something simple. They don't make any money out of it. It's not like their email, for instance, where they have to be able to read your mails to serve you ads. They actually don't serve ads for the chat services, and they can make at least the stuff between different servers encrypted. It doesn't take much. Okay, I can do it for the stuff that I'm running. Google definitely can too. Okay, but they still haven't. So it's going to take a while, and in the meanwhile, different governments are ramping up what they are doing in terms of surveillance. In India, in the past 2 years, and especially since the Snowden revelations, I feel that the intelligence agencies are actually pushing back much harder than they ever did against privacy. There's a privacy act that we at the center have been contributing towards. We contributed to the principles that the government formed a committee to put forth, and now we've drafted an act. But they actually want the government out of it. They want anything relating to security out of a privacy act, and that's at the same time ridiculous, but also something that they're countering now in a way they never did before. They're actually seeking to amend the law before a privacy act comes into force. They want to amend the law to ensure that the increased scope of surveillance. There's something called the central monitoring system that's being put up. There's something called the National Intelligence Grid, NAT grid, that's being put up. There are all these varied alphabet soup of acronyms that are coming up relating to intelligence and security, and they are being very aggressive in terms of pushing them in a way that they weren't earlier.
So let me summarize what we have so far. We have a few problems. We have a how to build a cat problem. My words, not yours. We have a how to encrypt everything problem. When we have a how to create a new church committee problem, which might be a subset of how to build a cat problem. You folks in the audience are smart about these things and probably have some other problems to pose to these distinguished folks. I'd like to open it up to the floor for questions. We're not using a microphone. We're using the on-camera microphone, I should say. So yell if you have to. I'll take questions if you have any hands up. Identify yourself if you like. If not, anonymity is guaranteed. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Henry. The discussions kind of seem to have this agreement that the crypto wars have been won in the U.S., but I would actually disagree to the extent that the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and CLIA and what Louis Freeh did under the Clinton administration, I really feel like set the groundwork for what happened with Snowden and everything else. You were there.
I said we thought we won.
We were
wrong.
And we were wrong.
Though the Telecom Act, which came 2 years after CALIA, which was 1994, CALIA did say if you're at that point it was a telecommunications provider, like a phone company, you got to build in snooping. Yeah. All new technologies like this have to be wiretappable, which is a very dangerous precedent. But it did say you don't have to. They did have some language about you don't have to decrypt encryption if it's end to end.
Sure.
But you were going to say, sorry.
But I feel like that kind of set the framework in place, because before that there was a Clipper chip initiative where it was trying to create encryption with a backdoor by default. And when that failed, when John Homer showed that didn't work, then they kind of moved on to this other area. And to the extent that we're trying to reverse the course of action and we're fighting against this tide of laws that have basically created this set of circumstances, how do you go about doing that? Because it's the same thing with the DMCA and how it's, some people feel like the fight's already been lost because it's by statute, it's gone before the Supreme Court, and they basically said Congress has to change. But what you said, Congress is not going to pass laws anytime soon. So how do you deal with this when the kind of foundations of the problem are set so far back in the past, and we're living with the problems in the present? How do you deal with this now?
Vote libertarian, move to the moon, or go to a seastead. Anyone?
I think it works for us too. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that historically we've never seen policy effectively constrain surveillance. So I think that yes, policy has enabled them to do this. We can pass laws if we want, but there's no solution for us that's going to come from there. The solutions to this are elsewhere.
I think, so we have CALIA and we have ECBA and there are problems, but we don't have CALIA 2. And we're not going to get CALIA 2 either. So we're stuck with CALIA and we're not going to get it taken away, but we're not going to get worse laws, which I think is something to talk about right now, because CALIA 2, I think a year ago, people would have said is a given. That's coming, and you can fight as hard as you want to, but it's coming. And now that conversation
And
is
CALIA
dead.
is the principle that new technologies like maybe internet phone calls should be wiretappable by law. Okay, too. Yeah.
And then we have great court decisions on ECBA. Really great court decisions calling parts of ECBA unconstitutional. So you're not getting ECBA reform, but you are seeing the law interpreted in a way that is incredibly favorable. So it's not necessarily we should be aware, we should be pushing, always push, but we also should acknowledge the victories that come with that also.
Quickly, that's other hands up. Go ahead. Either or both.
Can I go really quickly then?
Yes.
I just wanted to push back a little bit and separate two things. There's, I think, a very legitimate question about whether we won a surveillance war in the 90s. But I think when it's just the crypto war, we won that. Yeah. We got good crypto. And I think the core of this panel, with everything else that's floating around it, the core of this panel is the second iteration of that. Are we going to lose good crypto because of standards being watered down and backdoors being inserted? And that's the fight that I don't know if any of us are confident that we're going to win that. And it's really a big contrast, because in the 90s we had lots of conversations about surveillance, but we ended up having good open conversations just about crypto and just about tech and your ability to build technology and use technology and share it and use it to communicate with other people. And we won that because we had good conversations about it. When people looked at it and talked about it, they're like, it's ridiculous that we wouldn't be able to use this. We're not talking about this enough. the more people are talking about 0 days and backdoors and pushing and watering down standards, it's ridiculous on its face, right? So the more that we're talking about this, the more likely it is, yes, the surveillance fight is a long, long fight, but let's win the crypto fight as a big part of this and not conflate these more than we have to.
Three very quick points. One, I support completely what Amy said about judiciary. Whether in the US or in India, I see cases being the main form of actually getting change. The second thing about the crypto wars, they were kind of won in the US, not in the rest of the world, where you still have those kinds of law, whether through laws or through contracts or whatever means, you have those kinds of ridiculous provisions. And we also know that that technology, I'm less concerned about intentional lowering of encryption than most other people, because, well, sure, the NSA tried. They got something in through NIST, but that didn't really go very far. One company took it up, and even before it took it up, people knew that it was probably a backdoor. Okay, so I'm less worried about that aspect of crypto as much as, say, just very basic facts of implementation. Not enough people are implementing it. We don't have enough end-to-end encryption. Okay, that we don't have enough decentralization, which I think is a very important part of all of this, because it can have encryption, end-to-end encryption. We might not get, but the moment you have stuff centralized, you have a target for governments, and they're going to get it.
Let's move on. That's a good note to end this phase on. Any other questions? I saw, in the second row.
Just a follow-up to this gentleman. One of the other things, in addition to what you mentioned, is bureaucracy and the momentum of bureaucracy. Example, Poindexter and TIA, well, that got shut down, Congress made a fuss, but it never done. It just got split up and implemented in other ways. And I think we're always going to be faced with that challenge as well.
I think we can go to another question.
Regarding Kalia 2, I hope, Amy, that you're entirely correct, but I fear that we're going to get something worse under a different guise. I fear that when the administration proposes a 215 fix, it's going to include mandatory data retention, and they've been talking tech-neutral data retention, and to me, that's Kalia 2. Right? When they start talking about mandatory data retention, including over-encrypted channels, we're all screwed.
Okay, agreement here. I don't know. We can just go on. Any other hands? Yes.
Just kind of are we sort of in a chicken and egg situation now, in the sense that if over the next half a decade or a decade we increase end-to-end encryption, that pretty much kind of feeds into needing more surveillance and needing more encryption. Are we sort of approaching that point with our digital world of sort of chicken and egg?
I think actually more end-to-end doesn't necessarily need more surveillance. I think it means more targeted surveillance. And if we move to an environment of more targeted surveillance and let's surveil the whole world because we can, I'm much more okay with that world.
Yeah.
So this is instead of collecting everything at the fiber taps, it's actually sneaking into the suspected terrorist house and sticking microphones in the ceiling or something.
And intercepting his computer, it turns out.
Even better, yeah, ma'am. Okay, so other questions, points, rebuttals? We're gonna. We get to keep chatting. There's.
Should I try and throw in a firebomb here?
So, as a designated non-U.S. citizen NSA apologist, please do.
Never thought to hear that.
We have, some of you might know the necessary and proportionate principles, right? That a bunch of NGOs, including mine, contributed towards. But there's a problem there's a tension between what most of us on this panel are saying in terms of encryption and what we agreed to in terms of surveillance. If a government complies with all of necessary and proportionate, all the principles over there, then they actually can't do much targeted surveillance either. They actually can't do much of anything. Okay, so on the one hand, at the policy level, we are generally fine if after lots of legal hurdles have been cleared, which are very necessary, if the government has access to your data. But technologically, we want to make that impossible. So how do my fellow panelists view that and view to resolve that?
There are always bugs.
I don't think it's ever impossible.
I mean, you cannot get rid of every 0 day, right? And this is basically, that's the box that we want to put NSA in, is that like, right, you can target who you think you need to target, you can roll whatever 0 day you want to roll on them. You know, we're going to fight you tooth and nail at every single step of the way. We're going to make you burn custom bugs to get single individuals. We're going to make this extremely expensive for you.
What if they don't?
But you have $152 billion a year. You can afford it.
Can I add to that?
Well, that's off by an order of magnitude.
Yeah,
It's
probably.
closer to 10 to 15. But
That's DNI as a whole.
So I want to give two sort of specific examples here. One is my favorite example. Until last September, I worked at the State Department doing Internet Freedom Programming funding. And one of the stories, my favorite that I used to tell there, was about Tor, because I talked about Tor a lot, and I still talk about Tor a lot. It's a great tool. It's very, very powerful. There was a really big, high-profile drug ring that was using Tor to sell drugs. I believe this was in Australia, though somebody correct me if they know the hypothetical if I mess it up. And the law enforcement there busted it. And they busted it not by trying to break Tor, but by getting an account, by logging on, by going to the Silk Road Cafe, and by using offline police methods to get into the site and figure out who it was. A lot of these encryption technologies do nothing to harm all of the existing ways in which law enforcement has been done for decades. So to the extent that that's possible, that is always something that can be done. And then to play off of Ella's specific reference to zero-day vulnerabilities, there's a very high-profile incident not that long ago where there was a 0 day in Firefox, version 17, which happened to be the one that the Tor browser bundle was built on. And that was used through a series of other things to compromise the anonymity of Tor. It was very complicated. There's some good and some bad stuff in this. But it's the sort of thing that I think can be done with targeted surveillance. I personally would want, if the federal government knew of a vulnerability in Firefox, I would hope that Mozilla would be told about that right away so that we could start to fix it before somebody else discovers it and finds it. But there's still a window there.
Let me interject this. Have you ever, to the best of your knowledge, been notified by any government agency, hey, you got this back, or sorry, you have a vulnerability? Ever?
I don't know, but I'm sure that happens a lot. I wouldn't be the one who'd be told. But I actually do think that happens quite a lot.
Do we have support for this proposition, folks, that the government should not buy 0 day vulnerabilities, should not
Stockpile?
Should not stockpile?
Raise the price of it. They've driven the market.
Yeah. No, it's true though. What Amy's saying is right. Like,
The reason the market, the reason that's a problem.
By creating a market for 0 day vulnerabilities, we have created a world where people who once would wear nice white hats, find bugs, and tell them to the companies behind those tools, now some of those people, not all, but some, have turned to selling them. And that's a cultural shift that I think is bad for security and for everything that we're talking about.
Let me also remind us all that that legally the same arguments about code being free speech are used by people who want to sell these kinds of vulnerability code as well, and who don't want restrictions, for instance, on their abilities to sell it to different governments, etc. So
I think that we should certainly, our country should refrain from buying. We should encourage our allies to refrain from buying. We should shame the living hell out of people who do sell.
Great.
But no, we can't ban this. You know, if we ban this, if we pass export controls against 0 days, you are basically saying, oh, that's an export control on speech. Ah, now code is no longer always speech. Oh, that nice end-to-end crypto product. Boom. Back into the same fight that we thought we won in 1999 or wherever, right? So yeah,
Shaka should be in this room.
you know, I mean, you know, if we want to, you know, there are lots and lots of tools that we can use to deal with people selling 0 days. We can start talking about software liability. I know that's a very unpopular phrase in Silicon Valley, but I think that there are probably interesting ways to construct software liability laws.
What would those interesting ways be? If you're emperor for a day,
Well, So I mean, one of the things that you can look at what the intent of the code is, right? That if you have code which is intended to exploit and undermine the security of the
This is
system.
Apple's go-to fail button. Look at that. You look at this.
That is not intended. That is a vulnerability that was put in there. As far as we have any reason to believe, accidentally, I'm not going to lay any accusations from here, but that was not code that was written with the intent of exploiting another system. And there's also a huge difference between this is a proof of concept bug, the kind of thing that I'm going to send to full disclosure to say, hey, you have an issue, you need to patch your software, and a weaponized exploit that's ready to be delivered in the field at scale with command and control structures and all this other stuff. There's an adjudicatable intent difference there.
The lawyers on the panel have any opinions on this? Yeah, you're a lawyer. You have a legal degree. Does that make you a lawyer?
Well, I can represent clients in India, yes.
I think that makes you okay. So we have 3 lawyers on the panel. Does this sound reasonable?
Yeah, I'm there.
Well, I actually haven't made up my mind on this issue yet, so I'll pass it on to Chris.
I'm a little more on the fence as well. I mean, I hear where you're coming from. I think there's almost certainly a good First Amendment differentiation to be made between code and software that underlies these things, and as you put it, the command and control packaged infrastructure. And I hope that there would be, because there are efforts in a lot of government circles to try to figure out if there's a way to control this, not to ban it, but to require a license so that it can be processed and tracked, and to try to restrict the flow of a lot of these attack tools to bad governments. But I definitely hear where you're coming from, and we definitely need to all be paying attention to make sure no First Amendment rights are being limited here.
This is one of the reasons specifically why I'm saying liability, not export flow controls.
Good
I'm
point.
much
No,
more
great.
comfortable with liability, because then I can say, okay, you can write whatever code you want. If you want to do like malware research, whatever, this is a thing that people do, you can do all of this stuff. The second, the Italian government finds Italian code, attacking citizens, whatever, all of a sudden, a giant, a ton of bricks lands on somebody's campus. And we have a diversity of legal tools other than just
That's right.
export controls. We should explore that diversity.
Yeah, we have the same goals.
Just a couple of things to think about. One, DCSS, for instance, which was used to crack DRM, was executable. It's out in the field. So in many ways, it resembles some of the weaponized things that you're talking about. And if those can't be considered speech, one of the big defenses of DCSS was that is speech. So you'd have to create some kind of distinction between those. And the second thing would be for the idea of software liability could possibly work with larger companies like Mozilla, etc., or NGO or non-profit organizations, etc., that have some legal form. But what about hacker groups that since the 90s and even before
free software and
exactly.
with the BSD license. But we're going a little too far in the weeds here. I'm sorry. We can get back to this if we have time. We only have about 10 minutes left, folks. How about this? We're talking a lot about targeted surveillance is fine. Maybe let's protect U.S. citizens. But isn't that kind of throwing foreigners under the bus here, folks? I mean, so it's okay to listen to you as much as you want. We're going to infect your computer even though we don't think you're a terrorist because we're the NSA, you're not a U.S. citizen. Is anyone willing to stand up for universal human rights?
I think that's what the principles are all about. The application of human rights principles to communication surveillance are not citizenship specific.
Existing international treaties, such as the ICCPR, which, for all it's worth, the U.S. has ratified, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Well, that is not nation-specific either, and it does protect privacy. And at the very least, I would say mass surveillance of the sort that we've seen today would be illegal under the ICCPR.
But I mean, in terms of real DC politics, again, I mean, this is not about turning the NSA's massive electronic ear outward, making sure it doesn't go inward, just outward only. It's about really changing the shape of it completely, which is a much more difficult political question, no?
Well, I mean, it's the session this morning. I don't know how many of you were there, but one of the things that I think it was Bart pointed out was that in the president's January speech, he, for the first time, first president to do this, actually said that there should be rights for non-U.S. citizens. So that, I think that shift is happening, and it's newly happening. I
Also
don't
talk
think it
about
was
data
anticipated.
retention 2 months ago. I mean,
Well, no, I think Amy's right. That shift is happening. It's happening slowly. It's not happening as quickly as I or anyone else up here would like it. But the administration is often seen as a monolith outside the United States. Those of us who have worked in or with it very closely understand that to be very far from the truth. And there are lots of people within the U.S. government who are very concerned about this, and who are very big, personal, some of them within their roles, strong believers in the privacy rights of foreign citizens. So I do think change is coming. I definitely wish it would be longer, but we do have this legal backdrop. The U.S. government has interpreted the ICCPR and how it applies to extraterritorial privacy in a different way than most Western countries. So there's a very specific quirk there with the U.S. that hopefully we can push past in the years to come.
I'd strike the skeptical note here. I see no possibility of any kind of reform. It's like nuclear warheads or something. You want to have. You're always going to keep your own stockpile just because other people might secretly have them as well. So as long as foreign intelligence agencies have the ability to spy on Americans, and the American intelligence agencies are never going to say we are going to only walk within laws that we follow with American citizens. And frankly, apart from that political realism, there just isn't enough groundswell support for rights of foreigners here in the U.S. So, I mean, half of the folks surveyed recently wanted Snowden prosecuted. So, given that, I don't think people are going to start coming out for my rights for anytime soon. So.
A year ago, they were all for government surveillance also. Things change.
we have about 5 minutes left. Let me give each of you a minute or two. I want to hear your predictions. Where are we going to be globally or domestically in terms of internet surveillance, especially as it relates to encryption standards and encryption use 5 years from now? So this is taking us politically into the next administration, and also time that any company that wants to encrypt everything has time to encrypt everything. So let's start, Chris, with you. 5 years from now.
So on the encryption and the standards point, I am ever the optimist, as has been reported. I do think we're going to be in a place where there has been a serious improvement and a commitment to maintain that improvement in transparency in how intelligence agencies interoperate with standards bodies, and hopefully a serious commitment to transparency as well in things like national security letters, and hopefully some serious procedural rules, albeit not likely what the strength that I would like to see around where, when, and how things like communications backdoors can be sought. I do think we will get there. I think the variability is in how effective those rules are. And obviously there's a big wild card there, but I think we will get something. And was the other half, like, how far will we get in actually encrypting all the things? All the things. Look, I think getting to a place where SSL is more common than non-SSL in web browsing is a possibility. But that's as far as I would predict on that.
No, it's not too optimistic.
I'm actually quite optimistic about the technology side of things. I think we are slowly but surely moving towards a greater amount of encryption, greater amount of slowly privacy by design as well, and more software engineers are actually thinking about these issues. On the policy front, both here in the US and outside, since they react much more slowly, they won't be able to rein in the technology as fast as those shifts are happening, and particularly because of this international Snowden moment that's happened. It's, I think, a tougher sell to say we have to rein in encryption, because that's the one thing protecting everyone else against American spying and protecting everyone else from all other spying. So we're going to see an upswing in governmental use of encryption. We're going to see an upswing in people who don't know they're using encryption but are actually, and policy is not going to really either change much to attack that or to require that.
Status quo.
So in 5 years, I think the zombies will have always been at war with East Asia. I'm going to change the question just a little bit and make it more of a pitch, because I think I've heard a lot here about how technology can save things, and I've heard a lot here about how law can save things. And actually, 5 years from now, I'm a little scared, because we've put a lot of really bad architecture in place. And even if, and I don't believe this, but as the administration claims that there have been no abuse of these programs now, the architecture is in place for tremendous abuse. And I think that actually the one thing that I put a lot of faith in, no, one of the main things I put a lot of faith in is transparency. Because it's Cory Doctorow's dead man switch. If everything is out in the open, then the moment when it's not in the open anymore, something is wrong. You're not necessarily going to know what it is, but when you shed sunlight on everything and then you take that sunlight away, it's a warning. And I think that's when everybody will get called to action. So I'm, in addition to the technology and in addition to the change of laws, I'm on board with both of those things. I also think we need a really, really strong push to open up the government to public eyes. Public eyes.
So I'm actually fairly hopeful, certainly on the technology side. I think that we are already seeing a wellspring of new startups, shifts in technology in a lot of ways. I think we're going to be looking at a very different technology market. I think part of that is that we're going to see what the actual cost of the NSA spying has been as we get just mass sales loss for US tech companies everywhere else in the world. And we've already seen Cisco's first quarter after the revelations, they took a 10% stock hit on a 24% drop in sales in Russia and a 12% globally outside the US. That kind of stuff is going to compound. 5 years out, we're looking at the window where large non-US enterprise vendor pushes can get spun up, and we're going to be looking at a very, very different tech landscape that may be incredibly expensive for the US, which I think in this case is great, basically, because we have betrayed the trust of the global internet. And I think that drive is going to shift a lot of technology, because frankly, the consumer and the high-risk user stuff that we spend a lot of time talking about is one small fraction of the actual global IT market. And as we start talking about telco-grade switches and enterprise core switches and enterprise-level servers, we're looking at a very different market, and that's where we're going to see a lot of shifts, because those people actually have the money to drive real innovation.
And I think that'll be the last word.
No, I want to hear you answer this question.
I wasn't even thinking. I was just thinking about how to wrap this up. If you insist, I like the way you're thinking. So let me riff off of that. I wonder whether there's any room in the legal landscape, and I'll let the three lawyers correct me if I'm wrong, so that a U.S. company can be based in the U.S., maybe owned technically by a subsidiary, but host their data in Iceland. Or if it's entirely end-to-end encryption, then you can have a U.S. company subject to U.S. laws with servers here, but they just can't. They don't have access to the data. The problem is we've seen two examples of Hushmail and LavaBit of the U.S. government, especially the FBI, sometimes working on behalf of the NSA, saying, "Well, if you're here, we can control you." So I think you might be right. I would, though I'd like for you to be wrong. So give these folks a round of applause.